I'd like to buy the world a home and furnish it with love. Grow apple trees and honey bees and snow white turtle doves. I'd like to teach the world to sing. Sing with me. Perfect harmony. Perfect harmony. I'd like to buy the world a Coke and keep it company. And the real thing. I'd like to teach the world to sing. In perfect harmony. And I'd like to buy the world a Coke and keep it company. It's the real thing. What the world wants today. It's the real thing. What the world wants today. It's the real thing.
Wow.
All right. From
I got a little
1971.
spilkus from that commercial. I got a little teary-eyed.
What was
Oh.
it? What was that word again?
Spilkus, but that's not the Yiddish word of the day.
Okay.
The Yiddish word of the day is pupik. Just say
Pupik.
pupik. Pupik. P-U-P-I-C. Pupik.
Okay.
That means belly button.
Perfect. Well, I've got a poll in the chat, folks. I already see that Coke is leading at 64% right now. Obviously, misguided people because they're drinking the wrong beverage. But
Oh, Hunley, come on, switch over, bro. You got to do the taste test, Hunley.
yeah,
Come
there's
on,
a
brother.
note on that we'll get into later. One thing everybody could do right now that'd be awesome: 356, 383. The number keeps growing of people who are watching now.
What?
But there's under 100 likes. So if you could just please tap the like, it'll help nudge YouTube to maybe get the word out and we can get the numbers up. It'd be awesome.
Right. Oh, Hunley hitting the bottle early, not waiting around.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I like that.
We'll both die a bad death. Possibly so.
Right. Is that Diet Pepsi?
Absolutely.
Wow. Go, Hunley.
Well, you're on Diet Coke.
Yeah, no, it's like two different worlds, bro. I'm telling you, we're going to get into some weird crap here in this episode. I mean,
yeah.
I forgot how weird the cola wars were.
Yeah, well, let's roll. I want to hear it.
Yeah, it's weird. I'll tell you that much. Everything, I don't know. Do we have any more videos to show or what are we doing?
We can start off with all the way back. I believe Coke was first, right?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So what does that say there? It's it reduces all these different things, right?
Yeah, it's a intellectual beverage, temperate drink that contains the valuable tonic and nerve stimulant properties of the coca plant and cola or cola nuts. Makes not only a delicious, exhilarating, refreshing, and invigorating beverage dispensed from the soda water fountain or in other carbonated beverages, but a valuable brain tonic and a cure for all nervous affections, sick headache, neuralgia, hysteria, melancholy, and C, whatever C is. The peculiar flavor of Coca-Cola delights every palate. It is dispensed from the soda fountain in the same manner as any of the fruit syrups.
Right on, Hunley. Way to go. Bravo. Now, that is John Pemberton. I don't know if you have a photo of John Pemberton.
I might be able to come up with one.
Yeah, okay, just so you know, because that's what he is the inventor of this crazy concoction is Pemberton. There he is. And this starts, this is a crazy story, people. This is not what you think it is, like many of our stories.
By the way, speaking of crazy, he shares my birthday, just like the doctor who liked goat testicles.
Dr. Brinkley.
Dr. Brinkley has my birthday. This guy has my birthday. Weird.
Okay, so that's odd. But anyway, so Pemberton, this is just really weird. You can't make this up, storyline. Pemberton, all of this stuff starts after the Civil War, and it's in Atlanta. So think about Atlanta in a post-Civil War environment.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this is where it comes from. I mean, the South has been destroyed. They have no industry. This guy is a
Confederate.
What's that?
He was a Confederate veteran.
Oh, no, right. Okay, but he's also a guy who's running a pharmacy type thing where the pharmacies are combined with these soda fountains. You know what I mean? So He, like millions of others who come out of the Civil War, is addicted to morphine. And this is really important to the story because morphine is given out to all the soldiers who are wounded, not knowing it's highly addictive. And when they come out of the Civil War, just like Vietnam, just like every war that we've covered, addiction is the result of the war because drugs are used to perpetuate the violence of war and to keep you going. So
Sure.
this situation is not unusual. It's the first war, really, that they're allowed to use or do use and massive numbers of morphine tablets. They're given out like candy, and Pemberton is one of the guys who comes out addicted to morphine. Now, this is important because he believes, like even today in addiction, people believe that they could switch products and get off the other substance. And you could fill in the blank. I was a heroin addict, somebody might say, and I switched to alcohol to get off heroin. The story is as old as Coca-Cola, is why I'm saying this. Because Pemberton puts cocaine in Coca-Cola because of his addiction to morphine. He uses cocaine to get off morphine, and he puts the cocaine in the Coca-Cola, and that's how it gets there.
So if he did both, would it be a speedball, or is that something completely different?
No, it would be a speedball. That's right. But in fact, many other people for 100 years in addictive underground societies will do the same exact thing that Pemberton did. So it's not completely insane what he's doing. But in terms of addiction, he's merely switching chairs on the deck of the Titanic, right? So he believes, which the society itself believed. If you go to New York Magazine in 1978, the cover story that cocaine is not addictive. It's 100 years later, New York Magazine, with a famous cover in the late 70s, said that cocaine was not an addictive product. And that launched the entire disco era.
Well, didn't we just have it again with oxycodone?
Absolutely.
You know, that they kind of put it out there. And in defense of morphine, if I recall, for the Civil War, it was a miracle at the time for treating the wounded, because there was nothing else available. As what, knock them on the head or get them drunk enough?
Oh, no, it was put out by Bayer, and it was a miracle drug and still is, and so is Oxycontin and oxycodone, but they're abused by different, 10% of the people. They're still miracle drugs if used properly, but he puts the cocaine into Coca-Cola. And that begins all of the crazy crap about Coca-Cola, alleviating exhaustion and giving you a buzz and everything else. So, okay, that's going to cut to, by the way, 7-Up, unbeknownst to anyone else, this is an inside story, 7-Up had lithium in it. Yeah, 7-Up had lithium, and this comes out in a trial that I'm going to talk about now that Barnes is going to love, because it's called U.S. versus 40 barrels and 20 kegs of Coca-Cola. That's the title of the lawsuit. And this is for Robert, who may want to look this up, because the trial is held in Chattanooga, Tennessee, the hometown of Robert Barnes. And I don't know if he knows about this case or not, but this is the famous case where the government brings in experts, both sides, Coca-Cola versus the government, and it's a huge, huge trial that goes on for weeks in 1911 in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Now, many people, through urban myth, thought that this trial was about removing cocaine from Coca-Cola. It was not. It was not. 9 years prior to this trial, Coca-Cola quietly and privately removed cocaine from Coca-Cola. So, what did they replace it with? Caffeine. They replaced it with so much caffeine that a Coca-Cola back in those days was like drinking 2 Red Bulls. Think about 2 Red Bulls. That's what the average Coca-Cola had in it in terms of caffeine. So
it was Jolt Cola 100 years prior.
Well, they called it dope, actually, because it was so powerful that they thought it was narcotics inside of Coca-Cola. They actually said, give me a glass of dope. In a soda factory, when you went in, the syrup, by the way, the expansion of Coca-Cola comes with a guy coming up with the idea of putting it into glass bottles.
Mm.
So these glass bottles were all over the country, and they were beer bottles. So they gathered them up and recycled these empty beer bottles of a certain size, not the classic Coke bottle, but a 6-ounce bottle nevertheless. And that became the launching pad for Coca-Cola, because it was no longer, Eric, in a soda fountain. Think about the difference. It became trucked in bottles, in cases, to your town where you could buy it. And that is
Asa Griggs, who bought the formula and got the bottles. He's a marketer.
Oh, yeah, it was a marketing. Right. Okay. So just so you know, all of the cola wars and everything else are about the bottling industry. The Coca-Cola does nothing. The company itself is beholden to the bottlers who really, let me just explain this. Coke and Pepsi take their syrup in a concentrate and they ship it for money to the bottlers, who add carbonated water and sugar. So it's a 3-prong approach. The bottlers run the industry. That's why they have these conventions where they kiss their ass, because the bottlers bottle the product and ship it out all over the world, right? So they send the concentrated secret, both companies, secret syrup to the bottlers, who add carbonated water and sugar, right? So this is going to come up later in the story because it's a huge part of the story. Anyway, getting back to this trial, the government sends in every expert they can to say that caffeine is dangerous to Americans, that caffeine must be eliminated. Now, nobody's using caffeine yet. Coca-Cola is using it, and it's part of their secret formula. So they're not telling anybody what's in there, because that's called, it's called merchandise 7X, by the way. Remember this. The secret code of Coca-Cola is called merchandise 7X. That's what's an untouchable formula. So in merchandise 7X is tons of freaking caffeine. So they bring in these experts, both sides, saying that caffeine is dangerous and this and that. Coca-Cola brings in experts who show that caffeine enhances your ability to do physical things. It sharpens your mind. It does incredible stuff. And it's true, Eric. They bring in study after study after study, blowing the jury away. However, the judge in the case goes on for weeks. The judge in the case has had enough. And he says, I want this case settled. And the end result of the case is Coca-Cola reducing the amount of caffeine in their product by half to where it is now. So in other words, that to where it is now basically was the result of the case. However, because the case had so much publicity in Chattanooga and spread out, caffeine becomes revered by the American people. That's where it starts. The caffeine craze in coffee in the morning and all that stuff starts with this trial in 1911.
That makes sense. Everybody who's following the trial said, oh, look, it proves your mind. And they go get it on your own.
The front page of every paper in the country. Yeah, the studies were indisputable. They were double-blind studies, way ahead of their time. Pure, unlike certain studies we've seen in the past 2 years. These studies were double-blind, scientifically based studies with hundreds of people.
They do hold up, too. I mean, there's still caffeine studies now that it can help. Obviously, in moderation. Like you can have too much and then build a tolerance and you lose it. But yeah, right. It does work.
You're right, and it is provable scientifically, right? And they did also say in the study that if you took 1 million grams of caffeine, you could have a heart attack. But that's not what was happening, and nobody was contesting that. So in a way, Coke was a victor in the trial. So in the Pepsi world, getting back to the competitor, Pepsi in the 1990s is designed by another pharmacist guy named Caleb Bradham. And he's another
1890s, by the way.
What did I say? 1990s?
Yeah.
Oh, 1890s. I'm sorry. 1890s gets a patent in 1902, but also in North Carolina. And this one is, also in the South, but in North Carolina. So this guy comes up with a formula and he begins to compete with Coca-Cola. and they're like a poor man's version of Coca-Cola in terms of getting a late start, getting the patent on it. As I said, in 1902, they try everything. They file for bankruptcy twice. They cannot get Pepsi going, and Pepsi becomes the drink, the celebrated drink, Eric, of poor white trash and former slaves. Because what they do to get a leg up in the market, Pepsi, by the way, Pepsi comes because of the pharmacy from the stomach gas ailment called dyspepsia.
Mhm.
That's dyspepsia is having gas in your stomach. So Pepsi comes from the middle of that word, just in case people are wondering where that came from, dyspepsia. And also designed as a tonic to deal with stomach disorders. So anyway, so Pepsi, to get on the map, is 5 cents. A bottle of Coke is 5 cents. They're both 5 cents. Everything's 5 cents. So they double the size of the bottle, Eric, from 6 ounces to 12 ounces, Pepsi. It goes like this from this. And it's sold everywhere in these bottles that are 12 ounces. So this is great all the way up to 1923 into the Depression. Poor people and African Americans buy Pepsi. Coke is marketed by Norman Rockwell paintings for the upper class. And if you see some of the ads I sent you, some of the artwork, I don't know if you have any of the artwork, but the old artwork from the 1800s. Yeah. Okay. Well, this is a little later. This is where they.
Well, that is Santa Claus. They pretty much.
Well, they resurrect Santa Claus. Santa Claus was dead and buried as a cultural icon.
Mhm.
They called him the old German winter man or something. They didn't even use the term Santa Claus. But they tied it in with the red, and they tie it in with Americana. They tie it in with Norman Rockwell paintings, and they go for the upper middle class. Pepsi is, and I'll just tell you this, Pepsi in the kitchen is poured into Coke bottles, Coca-Cola bottles, and brought out to serve in the dining room of a house, for guests, Eric. And I think every American has done something like that. If you grew up like Eric and I did.
With liquor.
With also a lot of other products. When my uncle Louis ran the coffee shop, Shelley's, which we have an episode on, he had me as a kid, and of course I was offended by everything. He had me pouring this bootleg ketchup into the Heinz ketchup bottles that were on the counters of the restaurant. Yeah, here's what I'm talking about. They go full upper class Coca-Cola. They go for the upper class market, and it is twice the price of Pepsi.
They had the mind share too.
They had the market share?
Mind share. I mean, Coca-Cola was the #1 brand in the world for probably 100
right.
years.
But we're gonna get to the world in 5 seconds, because what happens is in the Depression, Pepsi is having a better time than Coca-Cola because it's cheaper. But when the Depression ends in the 30s and they begin to get into more prosperity, people say, screw Pepsi, I'm not drinking that crap. And they go for Coca-Cola. And Coca-Cola, again, this is a thing that goes up and down over the years. The cola wars have many victories for both sides, Eric. And we're going to get into some of the other victories. For instance, World War II. What happens in World War II? The guy who's running Coca-Cola at the time, who is Robert Woodruff, a.k.a. the boss, says that I am going to deliver a bottle of Pepsi to every overseas soldier fighting the Nazis, right? And this is brilliant, because if you see a photo that I sent you of Coca, here are the Nazis, sponsored by Coca-Cola. So they're playing, this is just your random Nazi convention, I think it's 1938. But yeah, look at that combination of just pure symbolism. Coca-Cola and the ass sticker, I guess we can't say the word, so I'll say ass sticker to defeat the YouTube censors. But look at that. I mean, what a strange image. Anyway, when the war starts, Coca-Cola pulls out. But the point of the matter is that Woodruff decides that he will distribute bottles of Coca-Cola on all the battlefields, which is what he does. Now, this has a double effect, and I'll tell you the first effect. He goes to the government and he gets a abatement on the rationing of sugar. Sugar is rationed around the world, and he gets the government to say Coca-Cola is exempt from the rationing of sugar. But not
Pepsi. Not Pepsi?
No.
Shit.
Right. So Pepsi is destroyed again. And Coca-Cola, when the war is over, is left in the entire market of where the war was, Eric. You know, so it's now spread out through Europe. Brilliant move. Absolutely brilliant move on the part of Coca-Cola. The effort to do that spreads Coca-Cola around the world, and Pepsi now has to regroup and start to come up with something else. So Pepsi is now on the balls of their ass trying to regroup. And in 1949, they hire a guy named Al Steele. Now, Al Steele is a glorified car salesman. He loves to party, loves to drink, loves to go to Hollywood, and he begins to try to raise the social status of Pepsi in 1949 by marrying this nutty broad. And if you have a picture of her, that's a little later. That's 20.
Sorry, that was which nutty broad?
There's a photo of a woman that he marries who, in a famous movie called Mommy Dearest, says at the board of directors table, there she is, Joan Crawford, who in the movie version, Mommy Dearest, which is based on her daughter's memoirs, she's at the board of directors meeting of Pepsi and says to the effect, strap yourself in, boys. This is going to be a bumpy ride. And that's an allusion to her taking over the board of directors and running the actual meetings of Pepsi, because Al Steele goes completely Hollywood. And Joan Crawford begins to do commercials, and they begin to make high-end, high upper class commercials for Pepsi using Joan Crawford.
Okay. That makes sense.
Right. So they're now back in the game. And, you know, later on, they in the 60s, they begin to come up with different ways to market Coca-Cola and Pepsi. And it goes back and forth. Pepsi begins to branch out and merge with other companies like Frito-Lay, Eric. And you know what I mean? They begin to go in a separate direction. Coca-Cola will then buy Columbia Pictures. They both begin to branch out of Coca-Cola and out of Pepsi-Cola into other areas. And they also realize that they need each other like the Soviet Union needed the United States. You know what I mean? They needed each other because without the other one, there's no competition, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's like Ford versus Chevy or something.
Right. Okay. So just in terms of taste, Coca-Cola is a rougher tasting drink. Pepsi, as you're well aware, if you're a Pepsi drinker, is smoother, right, Eric?
Yeah.
I mean, the descriptions of the CEOs of these products, you would think they were describing fine wines from France. I mean, robust, smoother, sweet. I mean, you read their descriptions and you just like crack up. You know what I mean? So they hire a guy. This is really weird. They hire. By the way, I don't know if you remember the Abby Hoffman episode that we did, but Abby, when he was on the run, which is an episode people can look at, carried with him a bottle opener and a straw, Eric. And why did he do that? If you recall in that episode, Abby would find a Coke machine, open the door, and pop each bottle cap while the bottles were stuck in the machine. And with the straw, he would drink the bottles while they were lodged in the visible machine. And do you see those bottles visible any longer, Eric?
Nope.
No,
Amazing.
no, that's why the can and bottle comes down the chute, because of Abby Hoffman drinking all the.
I remember those stupid doors too that you can go pull you around.
It was stacked up, Eric, right?
Yep.
It would be like 8 or 12 bottles of Coca-Cola. And when you put the money in, it freed the bottle, you pulled it out. Well, what happened was the supplier would show up at the end of the week and he would see a stack of empty bottles. And that meant that Abby Hoffman had been there. You know what I mean? I mean,
Wow.
my mother, when I was sick, I don't know if there's any women out there who remember this, but when I was sick as a baby, my mother would go to Sid's Luncheonette on Plum First Street and get cherry Coke syrup and use it for coughs and sickness of children. And when you're sick, I mean, when you had a sore throat or cough and stuff like that, the mothers, at least my mother, went and got cherry Coke syrup from Sid's Luncheonette and used it for the children. I don't know. Maybe people in the chat remember that.
Well, I wasn't allowed to have sodas unless I had a bad stomach or whatever as a kid.
Yeah, bad stomach. That was another part of it. Bad stomach. Yeah. Okay,
Very
so
similar.
they begin to do in 1974 in Dallas, Texas, which is where we just were. There was one soft drink that ruled the earth, and both of these, Coke and Pepsi, were second and third, and that was Dr. Pepper. And Dr. Pepper dominated the southern Texas market, including Texas and the southern western market, for over a generation. Dr. Pepper, and we heard that, right, Eric? Everywhere we went, they said, "Do you like a Dr. Pepper?" And I went, "Okay, give me a Dr. Pepper," because it's so dominant in that region.
Sure.
That's a third company. But it's not going to really play into this because they have such a tiny market share. But they begin to do the Pepsi Challenge in 1974. And what they begin to do is compare Coke and Dr. Pepper. Then they begin to compare Coke and Pepsi. And that becomes a revolutionary situation because they begin to realize that people prefer the taste of Pepsi over Coca-Cola. And that blows the doors off, not of Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola would never mention Pepsi-Cola, Eric. That's how smug and dominant they were in the marketplace.
Which, there's a couple of points on that. Number one, that is smart. It's appropriate. I'm friends with Chris Lockhead, who's like a CMO in multiple companies.
Yeah.
And he goes bonkers every time a company mentions another. So he said every time Pepsi says they're better than Coke, they're idiots because they're just reminding everybody that they're second to Coke.
There's two schools of thought on that, right? So in 1963 to 67, they came up BBD&O, which is a big advertising agency in New York, represented Pepsi for many years. I remember from National Lampoon days. And they marketed Pepsi, and that'll be important in the story. They came up with a phrase called the Pepsi generation. And that was the beginning of going after the youth market, Eric, of the 60s. This was a huge, brilliant move on the part of Madison Avenue. Nobody had ever, remember how they would talk about how they marketed to kids in the 60s, all of these different products? It started with the phrase, the Pepsi generation. And Pepsi and BBD&O came up with it. And they undercut Coca-Cola, who could never get out of the old person's persona because the youth persona was now owned advertising-wise by Pepsi. So they couldn't go lower. They couldn't go to 5-year-olds. They could only go to old people, which wasn't cool any longer, Eric. So that Pepsi generation phrase sticks with Pepsi for almost a generation. It just keeps growing and is linked to them. And it will link them to every single story we're going to tell going forward in this episode, because Pepsi locks onto this youth market like an alligator and they won't let it go. But in 1959, they are completely boxed out of Europe and the world. And because of what I said about World War II and the sugar rationing and everything else. So they have a guy Don Kendall, and Don Kendall knows a guy, and that guy's name is Richard Nixon. And Richard Nixon in 1959 goes to the Soviet Union for the so-called Kitchen Summit with a guy named Khrushchev. And what Nixon does for Pepsi is he steers Khrushchev. Coca-Cola would not go. Coca-Cola said, this is a bunch of commies. We're not going to show up in Moscow for this summit. But Pepsi-Cola said, you bet your ass we will. And on the side, what Nixon did was in the symposium, in the kitchen demonstration where he showed a lot of the American products, he steers Khrushchev over to the table and he has him pick up a drink of Pepsi. And he says, the Pepsi that's made in America is better than the Pepsi that is made in Moscow. And Khrushchev, he's suckering him. And he wants this photo op, Nixon. And he gets, this is a very famous photo. He gets the premier of the Soviet Union to drink American-made Pepsi-Cola. And it's completely a scam on the part of Nixon. He's trying to do this for his friend, Don Kendall, and he pulls it off. For 20 years following this episode, they had the exclusive rights to Pepsi-Cola without Coca-Cola in the entire Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc. Think about that. They own the commie soda market, Pepsi-Cola. So they were able, and still think about the colors of Pepsi-Cola. It's red, white, and blue. It's intentionally patriotic. It's Coca-Cola is red. Pepsi-Cola is red, white, and blue, Hanley.
It is ironic because you would think that the red soda would go very well.
Right. But that's why the Chinese, if you show that photo you put up, that's why the Chinese liked it. Remember the Chinese photo you put up with the guy holding the bottle of Coke in his hand?
Yep. This dude.
Yeah, that's actually in bright red colors, and they matched it. That's what they've done is they've taken Mao's little red book out of his hand and put a bottle of Coca-Cola in there. The sneaky CCP bastards. But anyway, so Coca-Cola redeems themselves by later having Coca-Cola at the Great Wall of China. So they get the Chinese market with help of some other politicians. But Nixon is now linked to Pepsi-Cola. And this will become important because in 1963, which is what I was mentioning before, there's a guy who's leaving Dallas at that time. And he's leaving Dallas on a plane from Love Field. And he gives a quote to a reporter. It ends up on the front page of the paper in 1963, November 22nd, 1963. Take this one, Tucker, and see if you can figure this out, Carlson. 1963, Richard Nixon gives a quote that's on the front page of the Dallas Morning News saying, LBJ to be dumped from ticket by JFK for next election, right? He says this as he's leaving Dallas. Why is he in Dallas? He's at the Pepsi-Cola bottling convention, representing them as an attorney. That's why Nixon is in Dallas, because the bottlers are there. And as I said earlier, the bottlers are the most important part of the Coca-Cola and Pepsi operation. And that's why Nixon was there giving a speech and later becomes, or was at that time, their lawyer. He's not when he's president or vice president. He when he's out of office, he gets money from Coca-Cola, from Pepsi-Cola, and they are big backers of Nixon. And it's just ironic that in 1963, he's leaving Dallas because he's just given a speech at the Pepsi Bottlers Convention. Now, the interesting thing about the bottlers is the price of sugar. And this is going to come into play later in the story because they're left to their own devices to get sugar and put it in the drink. And they have to go around the world or to places like Cuba. This is, again, these stories are not dot connected. You have to connect these dots at home, my friend. They have to go around the world getting the cheapest sugar they can. And for reasons involving the sugar industry, we have a tariff on sugar, where in the entire world, it's 6 cents a pound. And in the United States, these are old numbers, but I'll just give you relative numbers. It's like 12 to 16 cents a pound with a tariff here. Okay. And that's important because when the cola wars begin to occur, there's a guy who says, screw it. Let's use this product instead of sugar. And the product is high fructose corn syrup. And it's a big effing deal. And the deal is created by a guy named Roberto Guazzetta. Roberto Guazzetta, if you have a picture of this guy, in 1981, Guazzetta, here he is, Roberto Guazzetta. Now you say, who is this guy? Well, this is an interesting guy. He comes from an unusual place in 1961 called Cuba with his family. They had interest down there. They flee a guy named Fidel Castro, and him and Fidel Castro went to a Jesuit school together down there. And we remember from our CIA episodes what the Jesuits mean to the CIA. This guy, Guazeta, comes with his entire family to an obscure place called Miami. And he is some kind of a chemist dealing with some sort of products in Havana. And he comes to America, him and his family. So he gets a job, of course, at a place called Coca-Cola. And this is like 1961, 62. And he is a chemist, and he works his way up the ladder inside of Coca-Cola, where he's eventually sent to Atlanta. And he comes to this guy, now an aging Bob Woodruff, and he says, the price of sugar is killing us. And he goes, yeah, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Woodruff couldn't care less because, like you mentioned, they have a huge market share and they own the planet, right? However, in supermarkets, Pepsi-Cola is now moving ahead in supermarkets alone, Eric. They begin to catch the eye of the housewife. And it could be the shape of the bottle. It could be the red, white, and blue. We're not really sure. So there's trouble on the land. And Guazeta, as a chemist, now I don't know how he got this far up the food chain, but he is a spooky cat, right? Guazeta comes to Bob Woodruff, the boss, and he says, I have an idea to save us money. And he says, what is it? And he says, high fructose corn syrup. And Woodruff looks at him and says, you want to change the formula of merchandise 7X? Are you insane? And he goes, yeah, I want to change the formula of merchandise 7X. And Woodruff looks at him and it says, in a career-breaking moment, says, go for it. Go for it. And that begins the change from Coca-Cola with sugar to Coca-Cola with high fructose corn syrup, which ironically leads to obesity, which ironically leads to cancers in rats and other testing, which ironically allows Coca-Cola to gain even more profit share in the market because they don't have to pay for sugar now.
It gets even deeper than that because the government's subsidizing the damn corn and it's next to nothing to buy it.
Yeah. So this becomes the bottlers do this. That's why I mentioned the Coca-Cola Bottling Association. Coca-Cola is doing nothing except selling them concentrate. And now they're going out to get the high fructose corn syrup. Coca-Cola is not doing this. They're selling the concentrate that's involved. These guys have to get the carbonated water and the sugar and now high fructose corn syrup. And they are very happy about this because they are now saving a fortune, Eric. Right. So this leads to Pepsi doing the same thing. Pepsi says, we got to get on board and we got to do the same thing. And originally in 75 to 78, Coca-Cola comes up with a product that they never release because it's not time yet. And that product is Diet Coke. There is no diet soda. And there's no need for diet soda until the 80s. And what happens in the 80s? Jane Fonda and the exercise craze. Mm-hmm. And that is why they eventually release the formula of Diet Coke into the world.
Well, and Tab opened that market as well. So that kind of proved it out. And people were getting that, and then they moved in and just took it over. Right.
Well, you know, they in 1971, like that, is that video, the Hilltop video comes out. We like to teach the world to sing, you know what I mean? And then the Pepsi challenge happens in 1974, and Coke responds to the Pepsi challenge internally going, let's try it inside of Coca-Cola. This is the same guy, Robert Guazeta, has the employees of Coke do blind taste tests in Coca-Cola, and Coca-Cola employees themselves pick Pepsi internally, and they go, we've got a problem, and they didn't know which it was, you know what I mean? It was blind. So they pick Pepsi and they go, we got to do something about this. So what do? They have these internal meetings, and Guazeta comes up with an idea, which I'm going to get to in a second. But in 1983 with Pepsi, really starting to cook, they come up with the idea of doing a very, very expensive sponsor commercial. Because keep in mind, MTV's now coming into the foray in the early 80s, Eric. And they figure we need these sponsors. We need celebrity youth to sponsor the program. So I think it was Coca-Cola comes up with like Simon and Garfunkel, going completely the opposite direction. But Pepsi-Cola offers a man, if he's a man, I don't know if he is a man, offers him $5 million, this guy, to do a remake of one of his hit songs that is now sweeping the country. And $5 million in 1983, I don't know, what would that be today? 30 million, 25 million?
It was money. It was
real
money.
Now, the negotiation over this is really fascinating. By the way, the guy's name is Michael Jackson. The negotiation over this deal is not with Michael Jackson. It's with his new manager, the prize fighter, manager, and promoter, Don First Degree Murder King. So you're now dealing with Don Crazy King, Pepsi. The guy's name is Roger Enrico, who's the head of Pepsi at the time. He wrote a book called The Other Guy Blinked, which I really recommend, about the cola wars. So Enrico has got to deal with this maniac, Don King. And Don King is not really, they don't know if he really has the ear of the Jackson family or not. Michael Jackson's father shows up at some of the negotiations, and they're making all kinds of crazy demands. They don't want Michael Jackson's face in the commercials originally. They don't want him in there. And the guy's saying, "Look, I can't pay you $5 million for a cameo appearance in a commercial. This is insane. You know, either he's the sponsor or he's not." So the negotiations go on for over a year. And there's lawsuits involved. They're threatening each other. They try to shoot the commercial at one point, and it doesn't work. And then they come back and they hire Bob Giraldi. Now, Bob Giraldi, this is interesting because it ends up that Bob Giraldi shoots the videos for the Thriller album, Eric. And one of them that he shoots the Billie Jean one. So they say, we want to do not a parody, but a remake of the Billie Jean video, just changing the lyrics, putting Pepsi lyrics in there, which is what they're going to do. So they want the same look. So who do they hire? Is Bob Giraldi. It makes sense. So Bob Giraldi is a fanatic. He shot a lot of commercials and he shot a lot of rock videos. He shoots this thing 3 or 4 times over and over again. And then as Michael Jackson is walking off, an incident occurs.
I wonder what that is. Possibly this one?
Let's take a look.
There it goes.
Right. So he is now jumped upon by everybody to put out the fire in his own head. He had a fire in his head because the fireworks that Giraldi was shooting off for the video, a couple of them landed in his hair and set his hair on fire, and he got 2nd or 3rd degree burns in his head. His brothers were there too, and they tried to stamp out his head and put out his head, which was engulfed in flames. So Pepsi, this guy Enrico gets a call, Pepsi-Cola, and they said, Michael Jackson's in the hospital with 2nd or 3rd degree burns. Goes, what? He says, yeah, it went really bad. And I mean, they have a complete heart attack meltdown, Pepsi-Cola, over this thing. So it gets weirder because Michael Jackson now demands that footage that you just showed be released to the public. He wants that footage to be released on MTV. And they believe that he's doing this because he's going to sue Pepsi, and he wants the entire world to see what happened. So Pepsi gets on the phone with him, and they use a very interesting analogy to talk him out of it. And they said, remember Dallas in 1963 on November 22nd? And then he goes, yeah. They go, remember the Zapruder film of Kennedy? He goes, yeah. He says, that's all anyone remembers of Kennedy. Do you want everyone to just remember you for having your head on fire? And this works. This makes Michael Jackson say, never mind. about this Zapruder film of my hair catching on fire. And Pepsi is saved because of this analogy by Enrico to Michael Jackson and his lawyers, that you'll be remembered like JFK in Dallas in 1963. You can't make this up, Hunley.
Yeah, but he's not forgotten by everybody. I mean, there's somebody else who did something.
Well, look, okay, so this was in 1985. This was one of the first issues I did at National Lampoon when I started there, and it was our celebrity roast. You could see, get it on, you see the headline. There were some other celebrities we roasted in there that listed on the side, but this was the cover. We took a lot of heat for this, and we took some flack, but sold very well. That cover sold very well, putting Michael Jackson's hair on fire on the cover. And later on, I would do some other editions of the magazine. But I think that was the first or third one that I ever was involved at Lampoon in 1985.
I'll have to put it up on Locals later.
I think there's more inside in terms of the storyline.
Oh, I'm sure. But
anyway, so this Pepsi challenge thing becomes an issue, and Coca-Cola is not really, they're caught off guard, and they say, what are we going to do? So this guy, who I think is a spook, this Robert Guazeta from Cuba, says he's now the chairman of the board because Woodruff retires. And Roberto Guazeta says, why don't we get rid of Coke itself and come up with you can't make this up. He says, why don't we get rid of They're so spooked by the success of Pepsi-Cola with the Pepsi challenge with Michael Jackson. They're now signing Lionel Richie. Pepsi-Cola is massively here's one version of it. Yeah, it's all over the country. It's all over the country, sweeping the nation. It starts in Dallas, but the reality of it is Coke is on the run, Eric. They're on the run. And what Guazeta comes up with is we're going to, again, he comes up with this idea to get rid of Coca-Cola as we know it and replace it with something called the New Coke. Now, the New Coke is tested repeatedly before it's released, but it's improperly tested. The testing that's done was designed by the pollster to appease Guazeta. In other words, he told them what they wanted to hear. And this is for Rich Barris. Rich, if you ever see this episode, check out this segment, because Guazeta hires a guy to do the polling on the taste of this product that's going to be called the New Coke. And the guy he hires used to work for Jimmy Carter, and his name is Pat Cadell. Pat Cadell is the pollster that is now, today, Pat Cadell is considered a joke in terms of polling, and he's, for many years up until now, he is hired by Coca-Cola to do the polling, and he does not do double-blind tests. He does not do any of the real polling. He just says everyone loves it. Go for it. Right? So Guazeta gets rid of Coca-Cola itself and replaces it with the New Coke with this particular spokesperson. You're going to put a picture up right now.
No. Which spokesperson? Yes. Yeah. Oh, America's Dad. Sorry.
This guy becomes the spokesperson. And this is not a can of the New Coke, because the New Coke says, I think on the side, new. But nevertheless, Bill Cosby becomes the spokesperson for the New Coke. And Bill Cosby, among other celebrities that they use, this thing, the New Coke, and getting rid of Coke. They didn't, you don't understand, they didn't put this out as a side product. They put it out as a replacement. Tens of thousands of Americans go berserk writing letters to Coca-Cola. It becomes the biggest marketing debacle in American capitalist history. And Pepsi-Cola gives their employees the day off, celebrating this incredible debacle by this Cuban cat named Roberto Guazeta, who chucks out Coca-Cola and replaces it with this incredibly harsh swill called the New Coke.
I remember at the time, and I remember the outrage, which was greater than the product change.
Absolutely. So they're completely freaked out by this. Hold on, I got to open up another little can of the diet substance. This is on the market for 90 days. And those 90 days were the worst 90 days in Coca-Cola history. They were taking flack, incoming fire from everybody, from the Bottlers Association, schools, gyms, grocery stores. Everybody freaks out. And Guizzetta says we got to go back to the old Coke. So what he does is he re-releases in July of that year, he re-releases Coke Classic, right, Eric? If you remember that. And it's the same Coke, but they released it as Coke Classic. And because of this blunder, their market share goes through the roof, Coca-Cola, by accident.
Yeah, it was actually a brilliant thing in the end by accident, because there was such a pent-up need for the original Coke that was taken away from everybody that people raided the store shelves and bought Coke Classic like crazy.
Right. And there was always the rumor that they did it intentionally, but they didn't. And they admitted it themselves that it was a debacle. This was not their marketing plan like some people thought. There was always this conspiratorial idea that they put out new Coke just to replace it with Classic Coke. Oh, no. It was a debacle, my friend. And it opened the door for Pepsi to get even a larger share of the market, even though they did compensate or overcompensate with Classic Coke coming back into the marketplace. They then begin to get into schools, like going to public schools around the country in Ohio and saying, we'll build your entire gym, Eric, if you allow us to put Coca-Cola or Pepsi into the gym. And this becomes a huge scandal. Not a scandal, but it becomes a debate in American society whether they should be funding school programs.
Well, it's a debate even now that there's Coke machines in schools.
Right. In fact, there was one school in Ohio where they paid for the entire gym from scratch. And, the school board said, thank you very much. They put the Coke machines in. And across the street was an old house from the school where the hip kids went and smoked cigarettes. Pepsi-Cola, and this is a rural area, paid the homeowners to put a Pepsi-Cola machine in their driveway. And the kids, because they didn't want it forced down their throats, went across the street after school, and every single kid paid for a bottle of Pepsi-Cola out of that machine. And they had to keep driving the Pepsi truck all year long to refill this one machine, which was in the driveway of a simple little house across the street from the high school in Ohio. I always thought that was kind of cool.
That's some guerrilla marketing for sure.
But that is Pepsi-Cola. Pepsi-Cola is guerrilla marketing, and they've always been number two, and they've had to do guerrilla marketing just to survive.
Yeah, I can't remember. There's a rental car agency that played with that really well when they said, we're
Avis.
never true, so we try harder.
Avis. Yeah. And again, Pepsi began to, there was when they took over Frito-Lay, Lay was a guy, Lay's potato chips, he passed away, and then Pepsi owned Frito outright. Somebody had tried to, and did, change the formula for Frito chips, for Fritos. This is before New Coke, and it was a minor but similar debacle. And they had a phrase around Pepsi that said, don't F-U-C-K with Fritos. And that became the mantra after New Coke that they always said around the office, don't F with Fritos. In reference to Coke, not themselves, because they had caught themselves, and it was a minor version of the New Coke. But I don't know if people remember this, but Fritos took a huge dive. And I love Fritos, don't get me wrong. But that was a different kind of Fritos. But anyway, so this guy, the thing about Guizzetta is I really can't get my mind around it, but his son is also a Jesuit at a Boston college, and he teaches up there to this day. And he is into what's known as liberation theology and the Catholicism movement. And that liberation theology is a Marxist version of Catholicism. And that's why I'm mentioning the Father and the Son in this episode. They have the same name, Roberto Goizueta. The son is Roberto something Goizueta with a middle name. However, they're both coming out of this Jesuit world, and the liberation theology is of interest because they now have tens of millions of Latino Catholic Mexicans pouring into our open borders that they're trying to convert to this liberation Marxist theology, which is a Marxist version of Catholicism, Eric. And that's where the son, oh yeah. Because if you think about it, they cannot allow these deeply religious and spiritual families to come into the United States and begin working and breeding and having children and maintain their Catholic religious belief system. So the legend left behind by Goizueta and his son is about this liberation Marxist theology that they're trying to spread across the United States. And I don't know if people are aware of this, but I thought I'd bring it up in this episode because both Fidel Castro and Goizueta went to the Balin Jesuit preparatory school in Havana. That school moved to Miami. That when Castro took over, he announced that the island was atheist, religion was banned, as you're well aware, right? Mm-hmm. He shut down the school and seized all the corporations. Well, that is now what the Jesuit movement is. If you see our CIA episodes where they get a lot of their potential operatives from, Eric. So the kid, running this theological theory of liberation theology out of Boston, I find to be very interesting because they have to convert these new Latino immigrants. And don't forget, the liberation theology began in Central America as a pushback against the dictators in Central America in the 70s and 80s, Eric, if you remember some of your history down there, because of the Catholicism that was so prevalent in Costa Rica and Central America and those countries that had dictators.
Well, the church was one of the only ways to get around communism because people held on to their religion in the countries, right. And the religious people would smuggle, CIA and other information in because right. They weren't allowed to practice a religion. So they were saying, hey, let's try.
Exactly. And this trying to convert these new American immigrants from Catholicism, the current Pope. Right. That's true. I was just going to say that. Thank you. I was just going to say that and he's been professing this stuff, the Pope, and this is what they're now trying to shove down the throats of the new immigrants who are coming here out of Central and South America, because they cannot allow them politically to maintain their religious beliefs. You would have a party of atheists, progressive Democrats, with their base as deeply religious Catholics. So this is going to be an interesting battle over the next decade to see how many of these Latinos they can convert to this Marxist liberation theology, as the chatter just put up on the screen, that is being professed by the Pope himself. This is going to be quite an interesting situation, but I'm bringing it to the surface because a lot of it comes back to Coke and Pepsi, the cola wars, Central America, bringing this guy out of Cuba to run the largest, most capitalistic company in the United States. That the Coca-Cola logo is almost the same popularity as the American flag in terms of identity around the world.
More so.
Maybe even more so. And to take this guy and put him in charge of it, I always thought was suspect. And this is what I'm theorizing now, that it's more about liberation theology than it is about Coca-Cola.
Also, you and I were talking about this on the side, but much like National Geographic, Coca-Cola is everywhere on the planet and smuggling things in through the bottling network. Again, perfect, spook territory.
And also Pepsi going behind the Iron Curtain and into the Soviet Union. Who knows what they did? Once they got in there with their Pepsi-Cola operation, it could have been another way to infiltrate behind enemy lines, during the Cold War. I mean, going in with Nixon in 1959 was very radical for the time, and very surprising that the Soviets allowed that.
Yeah, everybody's got a blind spot. I mean, Russians loved and Soviets loved Levi's.
Right, but they also got a lot of money out of Pepsi. So I
Sure.
mean, they needed the money, and everybody loved the drink. But I think in a lot of ways it led to the end of the Cold War, just like rock and roll did, and the art world, as we show in a couple of the episodes from a couple of months back. But people, just to explain Diet Coke for a second. Diet Coke, the reason Diet Coke is so successful is a secret formula, separate from the other formula of merchandise 7X. Interestingly enough, just a side note, India demanded the formula for merchandise 7X from Coca-Cola, I think in the 70s. And they told them, no, you can't have it. And they pulled out from India, Coca-Cola, because India demanded the formula. So it's interesting because Diet Coke, the reason it sells so well is and I didn't even know this, there's an inordinate amount of vanilla in Diet Coke. And that covers up the harshness of the diet drink itself, which is aspartame and some other crap. It's vanilla that makes it palatable. Isn't that interesting?
In your opinion, but actually, I want to focus back on that because
it makes it one of the great Diet Cokes of all time, diet sodas, because of vanilla.
Right. Circling back though, because you were talking about the Pepsi challenge and the taste tests and how they kept winning. Malcolm Gladwell, before he was shown to be a complete woke asshole in the Monk debates and maybe disgusted with him as a human being, possibly for all time,
right,
discussed the Pepsi challenge in what was a good book called Blink.
Oh, okay.
And what he was talking about in there, and the reason why it was impactful is on the first taste, Pepsi is preferable in general with the super tasters because it has a bit more sugar taste, a bit more sweet, but apparently over time it becomes cloying. So having the drink that isn't quite as sweet, people will enjoy it over the longer term.
Interesting.
But it caused a lot of confusion, and it's a great way to rig a marketing because you have literally people are tasting it, getting that effect and going, oh yeah, I like it better. But they're just drinking out of a little tiny cup. They're not drinking an entire glass. They ran the same test in other experiments and they said, okay, now finish an entire glass. And then Coke started to win out, which right now it is winning out officially in our poll, which is obviously scientific because it's hit with us and it's on YouTube. One more thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Pepsi challenge was done by this guy. This is John Scully.
Oh, John Scully. That's right. He, the guy, Roger Enrico, who I mentioned the book earlier from Pepsi, worked under Scully. And when Scully had one of these TED Talks or whatever they had, they didn't have call them TED Talks back then. And he said the future of Pepsi is in computers and data. And they went like, he was talking to the bottlers, Pepsi-Cola bottlers, and they didn't know what he was talking about. And later that week, he resigned, as you pointed out, and did what, Eric?
Well, he started to work with this guy here.
Yeah.
And really, very famously, one of my favorite quotes of all time was from Steve Jobs to recruit John Scully.
This was a big deal back then.
Oh, it was a huge deal back then. Let me make sure I've got sound, because it's actually better if I just go and let John say it himself.
Okay.
And then he looked up at me and just stared at me with this stare that only Steve Jobs has. And he said, do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to come with me and change the world?
Right.
And I just gulped because I knew I would wonder for the rest of my life, what I would have missed.
Right. So Scully leaves to do that, and he's replaced by Enrico, who he recommends to replace him, stunning Enrico, who was a junior executive under Scully. And Scully was considered very avant-garde even for Pepsi. They didn't talk about it as sugar water. They considered it more important than sugar water, as you can imagine.
Oh, yeah. And Scully went on, long story short, went on to fire the guy who recruited him into the company.
Right.
very famously, ran Steve Jobs out of the company.
Right.
Then after he left the company and Apple was spiraling down, Steve Jobs came back and the Apple we know was born.
Well, these guys, just like Scully and these other guys, Enrico and in a lot of ways, even Roberto Gozzetta, these are professional, hardcore executives who are the peak of corporate execs, Eric. These are not amateurs in this world. They could go. A lot of them came from other companies like Frito-Lay or other places where they did certain things. I mean, if you look at some of these companies where it spins off, there's a list here that maybe the people at home could enjoy this, because there's a list of products like yours showing up for Pepsi and Coca-Cola, different.
This is the restaurants where it's served, to give an idea.
Right. I'm just going to give you the sodas and you tell me what company this soda is from. Okay. This is orange flavored soda, right? This is for the people in the chat. This is just orange flavored soda. Tango versus Fanta. Versus, and I'm going to throw a third in here. Crush, Fanta, or Tango. Which company is each one?
That's a hard one because 7-Up has one of the three, I think.
Okay, Dr.
Fanta.
Pepper has Crush.
Okay.
Coca-Cola has Fanta. Pepsi-Cola has Tango and Slice. Okay. Let's go with Lemon Lime. Okay. Slice, I gave you Sprite and 7-Up.
Sprite is Coke and 7-Up, 7-Up.
7-Up is Dr. Pepper in the U.S.
Okay, well, I guess Dr. Pepper wound up buying them, but they were independent for a while.
Okay, here's grapefruit flavored sodas. This is how crazy this is. Squirt, Fresca, or Citrus Blast. Again, Squirt, Fresca, or Citrus Blast. Okay, Coca-Cola has Fresca, Dr. Pepper has Squirt, and Pepsi has Citrus Blast. Very interesting.
Well, some of these I haven't heard of, like Citrus
I know.
It's kind of like, what? Yeah, it's
okay. How about cream soda?
A&W.
Mug cream soda, Barge's red cream soda, or A&W cream soda.
Okay.
What are the choices? What are your lineups there?
I don't know who bought A&W. I'm going to say Dr. Pepper probably bought them out.
You are correct, my friend. A&W cream soda is bought by Dr. Pepper. Barge's red cream soda is Coca-Cola, and Mug is Pepsi-Cola.
Okay. Dr. Pepper's gotten a lot bigger over time, quietly.
Yes, and that's why I'm mentioning it. How about iced tea, Eric, in a can or a bottle? Okay. Lipton, Nestea,
Arizona,
or Snapple.
Snapple's Pepsi, I believe.
I'm terribly sorry.
Oh, or Dr. Pepper.
Snapple is Dr. Pepper.
Again, damn it. Dr. Pepper keeps buying out stuff, screwing us over.
Nestea is Coca-Cola, and Lipton and Brisk are Pepsi-Cola. Okay, I'll just give you the last one is bottled water, because they then get into bottled water.
Aquafina,
Dasani, or Deja Blue. Repeat. Aquafina, Dasani, or Deja Blue. You tell me at home, listeners.
Pepsi, Coke, and Dr. Pepper.
Absolutely correct. Aquafina is Pepsi, Dasani is Coca-Cola, and Deja Blue, interesting name, is from Dr. Pepper. Okay, the colas are obviously Pepsi, Coca-Cola, and RC Cola on the top.
Who owns RC anymore? Is RC still independent?
Dr. Pepper.
Of course. Okay, so it's like Dr. Pepper has just collected everybody else.
Right.
Which is kind of cool.
Okay, here's the citrus one. This is a final one. These are the 3 citrus sodas in the world. Are you ready, Mr. Hunley?
Probably not.
Okay. Mellow Yellow. Repeat. Mellow Yellow, a Donovan song from England. Mountain Dew or Sundrop.
Okay, Mellow Yellow, I want to say is Dr. Pepper. The second one is Pepsi, and I'll just say the third one is Coke.
Sundrop is Dr. Pepper. Mellow Yellow is Coke. And Mountain Dew is Pepsi. You got one right.
Okay.
You did pretty good. You did pretty good.
I don't know. It's confusing. Even in the store, you can't quite tell because of the Dr. Pepper mix-in and stuff.
Right. But the reality of it is, this is despite there was a guy in, I think it's 2013, he bans big gulp sodas in New York named Michael Bloomberg. You remember?
I remember.
Okay. So this maniac says you can no longer have big gulp sodas. You have to buy small incremental sodas.
20 ounce, I think, was the limit or some garbage.
Pepsi, Coca-Cola unite against the short evil one, going to court and defeating him in a combo where they team up. They team up.
Which is good.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So there's a happy ending where they say we have to get together and destroy this little multi-billionaire man who is trying to tell everyone in New York. It was overturned in 2013. Is the reason I mentioned the case.
By the way, we're going to close out with a harmonious ending with them too.
Oh, is that true?
Yeah. At the end, so everybody has to stay till the end credits.
Yeah,
we're going to have a little harmony.
Yeah, I think you're going to like that. But do we have any super chats or any questions from the audience? Anybody have any questions about this? It's a crazy show.
Yep, we have super chats here.
Early, finish watching later. Where are you going? Where's she going?
She's already gone. I don't know. Hey, I have to catch up later.
Yeah.
Dustin Russell skipped my court date to catch a live feed.
That's funny. Well, there is a lot of legal stuff in this episode, which I think Barnes will like. What about Moxie? You know, that's the Yiddish cola that came out of Poland in 1880, and it didn't really take off.
Oh.
Yeah, it was
by the way, what is the Yiddish word of the day?
Borscht. It was like a borscht flavored soda called Moxie. There was another one called Scharft.
But there was a Moxie, M-O-X-I-E.
I don't know. I'm just kidding. But there was a Scharft, which was a potato version out of Poland too, which didn't take off either.
All right. Speaking of that, what's the Yiddish word of the day?
Pupik. I told you, pupik, which means belly button.
Okay. Did you tell me? I don't remember.
Yeah, at the very beginning of the show.
All right. It was a long time ago.
PJ was there before. PJ was fired so I could live. He was fired in the so-called Saturday Night Massacre by Maddie Simmons, and then I came in right after that.
Okay, Robin Christmas is a new member. Thank you very much.
Merry Christmas. This is our Christmas episode.
Kind of, because we still have Friday.
Peter's losing his mind. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And
you get a lot of Diet Coke with that.
For sure. And Peter's been very supportive. I think that's not the first time he's done that.
Any good Thai Cobb and Coke stories? You know what?
Somebody brought that up. There's something with Thai Cobb I don't remember, though.
I think he was a spokesperson at some point also. It's also,
probably.
He was, came out of Georgia. He was the Georgia Peach, which was the base of Coca-Cola down there in Atlanta. So.
Well, and by the way, you're talking about Pepsi, New Generation. That's one thing they were doing. That's why they hammered Michael Jackson, and they really focused a lot on getting the spokespeople of any kind of younger acts and whatever.
Lionel Richie was next, a young Lionel Richie, obviously then. And then I think there was other celebrities after that, and Coca-Cola really couldn't compete with that youth market because they would have to abandon their older market.
Yeah, it's a hard spot to be in. And
they were trapped like rats. Never knew soda could be so cutthroat. Yeah, I mean, look, it's called the Cola Wars for a reason. And it goes back to the Civil War. It goes all the way back to, and it's global. It's global. It goes to the Soviet Union. It's crazy.
Well, think of the profit involved and the money involved. I mean, it's like to actually make soda is so freaking cheap. It's astounding. And so it's literally like selling drugs.
Yes.
And you're going to have a war over that because it's all about marketing and all these other invisible things that have no cost. The taste has been there for 100-something years. It's not changing.
Right.
They tried that once. Didn't go so well.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Let me see. Already did Sporty Matt, who's our teacher. Thank you very much.
I'm high and I am
in my band.
I'm high.
I peed. I'm not banned yet.
I peed. I'm not banned yet. Oh well, we'll see.
Keep working on it.
Yeah.
Let me see. You made me do it. I borrowed a can of Pepsi from my son and downed it. Had to cleanse my palate.
I know. I don't like the taste of Pepsi. I mean, I'll drink it in a pinch, but it's weird.
That's how I feel about Coke and the can.
Fish cola, yummy. Yeah. If you put it all together, Davy Duke, I mean, there's a reason a lot of these companies failed to get into the market. You know what I mean? They just didn't taste good. You know, the filter fish soda, which was a brilliant idea. It's like Barnes talks about his friend who tried to invent hot ice cream. So you got the munchies.
Yeah. So some ideas are so perfect on paper, but
on paper,
implementation can fall short.
The Jersey Devil. I mean, he lives in the woods. See the Blair Witch Project. I mean, cousin of the Mothman.
I hate Blair Witch.
Look
at your genius pack.
Oh, thank you. My mom said when she was a girl, she used to eat Dr. Pepper and she loved it. Interesting. I've never heard that. I don't know. Hanukkah, I guess that would.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never heard that. But my mother would get cherry Coke syrup for the sick kids and for coughs and stuff like that. It was delicious. It was delicious because
when you're sick.
Soda fountain, which I learned years later. What's that?
When you're sick, but normally it'd be this like, oh
yeah. Well, when you go to get a soda in a soda fountain, they pump the stuff into the glass, hit it with cherry syrup or vanilla syrup, and make it into an incredible variation of Coca-Cola. I mean, I love vanilla Coke and I love cherry Coke when I was growing up at a soda fountain at Sid's Luncheonette on Plum First Street in Brooklyn.
All right, Posh is upset. We didn't get the puppet reference earlier.
I didn't understand what he was saying. What he was saying.
When he drank the Pepsi, he tasted it down to his puppet.
Oh, I didn't see that. I'm sorry. I apologize. I didn't see that. I'm very sorry. I didn't see the puppet. Puppet is belly button, as he well knows. I used to think it was your penis, but it's not. It's belly button.
I think I've showed this one yet, but anyway, Vilto Fish Cola, yummy. Okay. And great show as always. Thank you, gentlemen. Where's the ginger ale?
Okay, I'm going to tell you. That's funny you mentioned ginger ale because I'm just to go
Canada
back.
Canada Dry and Schweppes.
Okay, here it is. Here's the ginger ale. These are your choices. Patio. Seagram's ginger ale or Canada Dry Schweppes.
Canada Schweppes, I want to say, is Dr. Pepper.
Yes.
Seagram's, aren't they on their own? I don't.
These have all been taken over by these companies.
They are a Coke or Pepsi?
Yep.
Okay, I didn't know. I mean, because I know there was.
If they're on
I'll just say Pepsi then for giggles. I don't know.
Sorry, Coca-Cola. Patio is Pepsi. Whatever patio is.
I've never heard of that.
Well, again, some of these may just be sold in South America or Europe. We don't.
Fair enough.
You know, they may not have a presence here because the market for ginger ale is so dominated by Seagram's and Canada Dry that there may not be room for third.
Schweppes is pretty big here.
Schweppes is really big. That's a Canada Dry product, and
it is okay.
Seagram's has a Seagram's ginger ale.
Interesting, because Schweppes and Canada Dry, they may be owned by the same people.
Right.
They're very different.
Right.
Taste.
But they're both owned by Dr. Pepper.
Doesn't Dr. Pepper also have Cadbury or is tied in?
They have Keurig, the coffee thing that goes.
I know about Dr. Pepper. Oh, that's right. They are Dr. Pepper Keurig, who was actually owned by a coffee brand, which was very interesting. That company is growing. I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't outgrow Pepsi quietly.
Oh, it's on the list as being a competitor with these two giants. I'm shocked because it was such a regional company in the old days. It didn't even register a market share. That's why that Texas thing was so weird, because Texas, or I don't know if it was all of Texas, but around Dallas, Dr. Pepper ruled the earth, as many of our Texas followers will put in the comment section. If you could put in some stories about Dr. Pepper growing up in the comment section, that would be very interesting, because I'm curious to see how deep Dr. Pepper penetrated into that market regionally, because they didn't even want to do battle with Dr. Pepper down there. Coke and Pepsi. That's how dominant Dr. Pepper was.
Yeah, it definitely. Not just there, but a lot of the South. I mean, Dr. Pepper did spread.
Addictive products sell reliably. Cigarettes, Coke, cocaine, but I mean, it's really sugar and caffeine that's in Coke since 1907. Roughly speaking.
Sure.
But what about Jolt? All the caffeine. Jolt, I remember that. I don't know if that's still around. I mean,
I don't remember. I think Red Bull is taking over
Red
that.
Bull now owns that caffeine market, right, Eric? I mean, Red Bull is really dominating the super caffeine market.
That and the gas station little bottle nasty
right. There's
things.
sugar-free Red Bull too now. Most people drink that. You need to try cheer wine based.
My wife tried that and thought it was disgusting.
I love cherry soda, but I don't know if cheer wine.
She hated it. She was like,
really?
And she loves sweet stuff, so I'm not sure.
Well, there's cherry soda and there's cherry Coke. I mean, there's two different things. I mean, there's also Orange Crush that I used to love as a kid. That Orange Crush was addictive. And I don't know what happened. I guess that's a smaller brand now. Fanta I never really liked, but there's some novelty brands that I grew up with that aren't around anymore. Slice is not very good either. There was grapefruit sodas. I don't really get grapefruit soda at all.
Well, they're usually for mixed drinks, aren't they?
Right. You know, a lot of these are probably in bars and nightclubs more than any civilian side of the road vending machine.
Catherine disagrees with me. I haven't had it. My wife hated it. That's all I know.
I can't comment on it, but I like the heating up of the Dr. Pepper, though.
That's just a regionalism. It's soda, pop, or Coke. Because if you're in the South, it's called Coke.
Right.
Even if it's Dr. Pepper, it's called Coke.
Right. The same thing with a Hero sandwich. It's a grinder. It's a submarine. Yeah, those are all regional variations on the same products. Pop versus soda. Interesting. Some places it's soda pop.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. Why? It's like shopping carts, which can be buggies, carriages, carts, or you're in New York, so you stand online. Rest of us stand in line, and a lot of little quirky things like that.
Well, how about in England when they say, you go to hospital instead of the hospital?
Well, that makes sense because that's owned because you go to school, not the school.
Right.
So if it's government owned, it's the term.
Even say hospital?
Yes.
That's queer.
You go to hospital.
It's totally queer. Totally queer.
Well, because of where we are. But I figured it out because I realized that school, because it's socialized, is you go to school.
Right. But we say that too. Here we go. You go to school.
Right. That's my point. It's socialized here. We have public school.
Billy go to the school. No, you wouldn't say that. But you would say if you go to the shoe store. You wouldn't say, did you go to shoe store? That sounds crazy. Right.
So if it's government owned, it's just a thing. But if it's not, then you go to the, and it's like whichever competing. I don't know why, but that's something I figured.
Very interesting. Wow.
Speaking of interesting, you can find that and a lot more on our locals.
Oh, yeah. I heard about this. Unstructuredlocals.com. We're going to put up some secret cola stuff, I think, some maybe ingredients.
Yeah, maybe we could put up an ad or two or whatever. We'll see if we find anything. Oswald,
his shirt
is a recommendation.
Ripped off by a child molester. What's going on with his shirt there?
Well, it's awkward with a wound.
The guy originally.
He's wounded like me.
It's really bad. It's really bad. So when you get on locals, what do you do there? You can shop around and
you can follow us for free.
Right.
Highly recommend everybody does that. Just follow us. You can see the posts. I always put a post to the shows on locals. 90% of the time it's first that I put it there.
Right.
And it'll go to everybody's email. And then that way you can kind of at least get notified, hey, there's a show today.
Oh, wow.
And then if you want to see more, because there's like the Jim D. Eugenio.
Name was Seymour, by the way.
Okay.
I'm just putting that out there. Now you're going to post the part 2 of the
part 3 has been posted of D. Eugenio and on locals. Again, that's for supporters only. So if you want to see more material and things that we put up, like Mark's scripts, his book, other things, different videos, I do a weekly live stream called the Girl Stream. And I'm also doing some walk and talks. I'm trying to incorporate that in.
Really?
I've got a new
with your hand. You can walk and talk.
I've got to go. I'm being careful with it.
Right.
I have my theory is a fail. Oh, come on now, Cherry, careful. Anyway, I have a new 360 camera, and it's pretty cool. Tried it out, so I walk around, and you can literally see everything that I'm looking at and move around. So that's going to be for supporters as well.
Yeah, I have the book fund on PayPal. Thanks to all the people who sent in donations for the book fund. we're going to try to do an episode on a guy.
Technically, yes, Sparkmaster.
Yeah, Pony Up. Yeah. They're doing away with the pony rides here in Griffith Park because one of the ponies died, and they took the opportunity here. I just drove past it today in Griffith Park. Hundreds of people there putting their children on the pony rides, which has been in existence for decades here in LA, has to be destroyed by the Marxists because you know the rules. So it's just really sad. But Merry Christmas to everybody out there, and thanks for all the donations for the book fund on PayPal and Venmo.
For sure, and good news though, we do have one episode before Christmas, so we'll be able to say Merry Christmas again on Friday. But for now, in the theme of this episode, things can get harmonious sometimes.
Right,
they're not always enemies. People can like Coke, they can like Pepsi, they can hang out together and have a good time.
How's the poll?
Oh, let me check that really quickly before I close it out.
We're doing an episode Friday, which is Freeform Friday.
Yep. 67% Coke.
Oh, 67% Coke. Interesting. Now, what about Tuesday? What are we doing Tuesday?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. That's something I'm working on then. Okay. I'll come up with something Tuesday.
We'll definitely find that out. So until
I got to get started on that. But Friday is Freeform Friday, which a lot of people liked last week. That was kind of fun.
Oh, it's fine. It's laid back. We just hang out, talk to everybody here. And on that note, see everybody Friday.
Oh, great. We're leaving? That's it?
We're leaving. That's
what about the video? Don't you have a video?
I am. We're closing out with it. Everybody hang out and see.
Let's make it sure. This is good, folks. Take a look at this. This is a good one.
Here you go.
Thanks, Billy.
It's cold. Woo!
What can I get you?
Blueberry pie and Pepsi.
Got it.
Good. Thanks. Working late on the holidays.
Yeah. It's hard on the kids.
Yeah.